morning and welcome back to the lecture series. We are discussing commentary on the genre of novel in the light of Miguel Cervantes' Don Quixote. So, in essence, the existential hero is in conflict with his self and therefore feels the isolation of experience in a hostile, indifferent world. In his quest for self reconciliation, the existential hero confronts the void and strips away the numbing guise of humanity, thereby accepting the untoward, the irrational behavior of his psyche. Moreover, the existential hero exercises the freedom of choice and accepts responsibility, accepts the consequences for his own behavior. In much the same way, Don Quixote has inspired and rendered his temperament, his follies and foibles, and his ideals to avowed existential writers in a subsequent literary period. Don Quixote can make free objects through an act of fantasy. In short, he epitomizes the existential credo. Don Quixote remains locked in his own mental cage. Uh, it wouldn't be, it might be wrong to call it a cage because his mind imagines something so vast, something that cannot be actually contained by his contemporary reality. His imagination, outgrows and flows out of all time and space. It does not have any uh, boundaries, any kind of any external parameters that determine and delimit it. So he acquires the designation of Knight of the Woeful Countenance, which signifies his uh, malcontent, his dissatisfaction with the disparity of existence after his adventures turn to uh, multiple fiasco, multiple disasters. These debacles bring Quixote to terms with the other unknown side of his own psyche. So, Don Quixote's journey may be characterized in many ways, but one of the most persistent motives is the hero's steady progression towards madness. A better word would be irrationality, or a takeoff from social signification, socially understood and agreed upon significations. Although the narrator emphasizes the duality of Don Quixote's consciousness, pointing out that his hero is, I quote, sometimes intelligent and sometimes foolish, unquote, and characterizing his speech as, I quote again, reasoned nonsense, unquote. His speeches generally produce an impression of insanity. So Don Quixote does not accept that outside observers can correctly interpret his condition or his experience, notwithstanding the volume of evidence that they produce and assemble against him. Instead, he reserves for himself the prerogative of epistemic judgment uh, when confronted with contrary data, contrary experiences. 3 centuries after Cervantes, we also see another author, uh, Franz Kafka, who's fashioning his own knight errant that goes to even greater extremes than Don Quixote to achieve individuality through self mutilation. However, I would also like to add that Don Quixote's society was still far more forgiving. They would batter him or at the most throw him into a prison. Uh, uh, but in Franz Kafka's world, the kind of surveillance, the kind of panopticon uh, uh, that one cannot escape from, which pervades one's dreams and private space too. Even one's bedroom is much uglier, much more morbid and perverse. So the world has changed. The historical realities have changed. The Kafkaesque situation is completely incomparable with that of Don Quixote's conditions. Don Quixote was still a free man, not claimed by history, not claimed by the state, the nation, which is certainly not the case of the diminished man who experiences the Kafkaesque situation. The in a way, that's also a very no exit situation, where one like we see uh, in the case of Joseph K, or in other characters of Kafka, either have to kill themselves or just metamorphose and fly out of the window, just take off, move away from the unbearable real conditions of life. So both Cervantes and Kafka's heroes strive for glory through embracing a regime of hunger which exceeds all prior instances of literary sacrifice. Uh, for both the hunger artists and for this character, Don Quixote, the path to purity is paved with starvation. They are constantly striving to achieve something fantastic, achieve something away from, apart from their real conditions, through you know through a kind of penance that they subject their body to. They are perpetually, perennially famished. So, unlike the knight errant, the hunger artist denies his greatness. He resists all attempts at sanctification and scorns the uh, admirations that are thrown to them by passers-by. Such denials reinforce the role assigned to these characters in the text as unfortunate martyrs. So there is the quality of a martyr that is very much visible in Cervantes's protagonist, Don Quixote. The interest of Don Quixote lies in the beauty of the character of this protagonist, and in the height of Cervantes's spirit that permeates it. And this kind of gets accentuated, this amplifies with the progression of the novel. This uh, becomes all the more visible at the end of the novel. In fact, the beauty of Don Quixote grows naturally and in pure isolation, in dissociation from the real world, the Renaissance world, the contemporary Renaissance world. The expression, the Knight of the Sad Countenance, only serves to elicit the reader's laughter. So we have already discussed in our previous lecture the kind of journey from buffoonery, from pure buffoonery and foolishness to saintliness, and you know, the reflection of the pure soul that Don Quixote emerges as, that Don Quixote becomes as the work journeys through the century. So many critics have already praised Cervantes as an expert storyteller for his natural, unstilted prose, and for depictions that he makes in his work that are almost flashy in their strong effect, and yet they couldn't have been curtailed. With all their descriptions, they are gaudy, they are flashy, but we wouldn't have it the other way. They are perfect the way they have been projected in the novel. And we also see Cervantes's flawless conversational technique, which is unsurpassed in the history of the modern novel. It, in fact, sets the ground for the modern novel. Cervantes' genius is that he translates the surpassing, and he suffuses the extremes of the epic of chivalry and the chronicle of realism. He kind of mishmashes, intermingles the two, uh, and something hilarious gestates at this crossing point, uh, at this point of acute conflict, right? So the contrast between Don Quixote's ideals and the real situations, as well as the reality of his own heart, is deployed by Cervantes in reflecting, in explaining his madness. Every speech Don Quixote makes is a critic of himself in action. So, this contrast, this parody, we have already mentioned this before. This contrast, this parody is intrinsic to the character of Don Quixote. It does not need to actually have the real world in juxtaposition with itself to uh, accentuate this kind of uh, upside downness, right? Uh, so this contrast that the man is, this kind of contradiction, this kind of parody that Don Quixote the man is, reflects much of the situation of the modern man. This is particularly illuminated at the point where he describes knights as, I quote, ministers of God on earth, and our arms the means by which he executes his decrees, right? Uh, so this is also, I mean, the knight is being represented as the messenger of God, as the tool through which the God operates. Uh, but then the godly platform is distanced from that of the knights. So we see kind of a prefiguration of the modern thinking man in this kind of a statement. So Don Quixote, in his malady and madness, then becomes an image and myth for the governing spirit of an entire age and civilization. He's not quite and only a contrast to the Renaissance period. He also bears some semblance, some essence of that period, as he's the first, he's the case of the first thinking man in a work. This work is not a chivalric romance, anything but that. He is the thinking man who can think differently. And the thinking man is at the heart of the Renaissance spirit. So, Don Quixote is not in opposition to this spirit. In some way, it bears this spirit too. For the people that Don Quixote meets, who regard him as a humorous and incongruous figure, he is the picture of their own lives riding through them. So, this incongruity, this disharmony that Don Quixote undergoes or experiences with the rest of the society also uh, comments on the disharmony that people in general experience with their own lives. The expectations that we have and the way life is are never uh, coincidental, right? Novel emerges from this kind of a problematic. So Don Quixote sees windmills and takes them for giants. They're giants in the sense that they are the large forces of nature and the world in operation to produce man's daily bread. So the giants are mythic just as Don Quixote himself is, and they are referred to as Briareus, the 100-armed monster mentioned in the Iliad as being more powerful even than his father Zeus, and protecting Zeus from other gods. So we get this mention of a character from Iliad, Briareus, while describing the windmill, right? Uh, Don Quixote has the entire outlook of the ethos that he represents goes to break a lance with them. All of Don Quixote's misconceptions have an element of poetry thereby. So it's very poetic, very creative the way he sees the society. It could also be, we could also, in a way, extrapolate and say that this is the starting point of the fantastic genre, the magical realism, where we see the world afresh through defamiliarization, through the eye, the wondrous eyes of the child, the marveling eyes of the child. So the sequence of adventures ends with the galley slaves, and they are followed by interrelated stories centered on people's dreams of love. Uh, in the best instance of optimism and idealism of the socio-historical ethos that Don Quixote represents, he frees a group of prisoners from their chains on their way to the galleys. And as he frees the prisoners, he has to say the following, I quote, "It does not appear to be just to make slaves of those whom God has created, as they promptly turn on their liberator and benefactor and stone him with an inch of his life." Unquote. So Don Quixote seeks to set men free, but has utterly bound himself by the narrow constraints of his own love as dictated by the tradition that he espouses, that he uh, that he represents. And this love has no other basis in reality than what he has chosen to give it. The rest of the book makes it clear that he is surrounded by a world of his own, the mirror image of himself, that seeking to free itself from the constraints of its human nature is bound by a similar outlook. So Cervantes lived at a time when the spiritual intensity of medieval Christianity that had inspired the myth of the Holy Night had already given up its ghost. It had gone out of life. Uh, it had become residual in tradition. So Cervantes saw that residuum that remained both in society and in the fascination through books of chivalry, and they so chivalry existed in the current contemporary time of Cervantes, essentially in the form of play acting as a sterile and artificial conceit against the Renaissance setting. It was existing farcically, not in reality. So Don Quixote becomes a figure for the modes of the time, wherein the forms of medieval Christianity continue without the spirit that had originally animated them. So that is how residual traditions remain on the fringes of another time space. One of the saddest moments in literature is where both men beside the deathbed of Don Quixote beg him to remain Don Quixote, the famous Knight of La Mancha, because uh, with this, you know, imagination disappearing, Alonso Quixano would also disappear. He would cease to be. In his ordinariness, there is no story. There is no incentive for him to survive. So the extraordinary that he has conjured also inspires him to live. That's precisely why they want him to believe in Don Quixote, to go on to remain the Don Quixote that he always wanted to be, the famous Knight of La Mancha, because they know that his passing is the passing of a whole world that Uh, Alonso Quixano had conceived for himself and for others. With Don Quixote's death, his world will be replaced with sanity. And this sanity is composed of all the bankrupt and absurd meanings, absurd dimensions of life. So, one 18th century imitation which seconds the perception of Don Quixote as essentially a work of humor and satire is Charlotte Lennox's The Female Quixote. Lennox's heroine Arabella belongs to what we may call as the literary Quixote school. That is, her folly is the result of reading foolish literature. She is the daughter of a marquis who has, before her birth, been forced into total retirement, and the two live alone in a country castle in isolation from the mainstream, with an extensive library of romances. And Arabella is growing up familiarizing with Urundetes, with Statira, Artaxerxes, and Clelia. So Arabella grows up familiarizing with different, characters of romance, and until she posits, she hypothesizes herself as one of them, and into that condition. Now, we have to also understand how Don Quixote's hilarity happens in terms of, or in the light of horizon of expectations. For any text to survive in a given society, uh, the correlation of author with readers should be conditioned by horizon of expectations. So, the formalist school needs the reader only as a perceiving subject who follows the directions in the text in order to perceive its form or discover its techniques and procedure. So, the formalist school assumes that the reader has the theoretical knowledge of a philologist who is sufficiently versed in the tools of literature in order to be able to reflect on them. On the other hand, the Marxist school is talking about historical materialism. It equates the spontaneous experience of the reader with the economic basis of production. It seeks to discover relationships between economic basis of production and the literary work, which is a part of the intellectual superstructure. In other words, everything else, all other expressions are pivoted on the category of the economy, right? The economic base. So the historical life of a literary work is through the process of its communication, and thereby a work reaches the changing horizon of expectation as a change occurs from simple reception to critical understanding, from passive to active reception, from recognized aesthetic forms to new experimentations, new productions. The historicity of literature, as well as its communicative uh, character, presupposes a relation between any given work, its audience, and new work which takes the form of a dialogue as well as a process, and which can be understood in the relationship of message and receiver, as well as in the relationship of question, answer, problem, and solution. So, the perspective of the aesthetics of reception mediates between passive reception and active understanding, norm setting experience, and intern new production. The merit of a literary history based on an aesthetics of reception depends upon the degree to which it can take an active part in the continual integration of past art through aesthetic experience. This demands, on the one hand, a conscious attempt at establishing canons, and on the other, presupposes a critical review, if not outright destruction of the traditional literary criticism. So, the analysis of the literary experience of the reader uh, avoids threatening pitfalls of psychology if it describes the response impact of a work within the definable frame of reference of the expectations. This frame of reference for each work develops historical moment of its appearance from a previous understanding, genre, from the form and themes that are already available in familiar works that have happened before. A literary work awakens memories of the familiar, particular emotions in the readers, and with its beginning, it arouses expectations for the middle and the end, which can then be continued intact or which could be changed, reoriented, or even ironically fulfilled in the course of reading. Uh, according to certain rules of the genre or the type of text. The new text evokes for the reader the horizons of expectations and rules familiar from earlier texts, which are then varied, corrected, changed, or just reproduced. So, we have to understand how the residual tradition uh, survives through metamorphosis in the dominant tradition, right? How it speaks to and lingers within the dominant tradition. The question of the subjectivity of interpretation and the taste of different readers in the contemporary society or levels of readers is relevant only when one considers that a transsubjective horizon of understanding determines the impact of the text. So, we are talking about the expectations and the taste of the readers in the contemporary times. The reader enables or disallows the earlier tradition to exist or not exist, or to exist in a modified fashion in the contemporary time. It if an older tradition is agreeable to the current taste, current sentiment, it stays on. Otherwise, it sometimes becomes dormant or altogether disappears. So, survival of a text is not an automatic process, but contingent on its demand and acceptance by the immediate society. Whether a text should be inherited and whether it should survive in the contemporary or current juncture of time are determined by how its features, which are residual in the present time space, interacts with the dominant tradition. If this interaction is harmonious, smooth, survival of a text from earlier tradition is justified. If the past tradition is ill received in the current time space and the interaction with the dominant features is not smooth, is incongruous, such a past tradition either remains dormant in the current society or it altogether disappears in some cases. Thus, in order to meet the horizon of expectations of a given populace successfully, there should be a peaceful coexistence between the dominant and the residual, which results in emergent features that are shaped according to the demands of the current society. The potential break between the two truths and the two worlds, two different worldviews, where one cannot come in terms with the other and bridge the gap, creates a hilarious tension and a comic situation which evokes laughter in Don Quixote. So, what happens when Renaissance world, Renaissance, focus on rationality, on homogenization, on the thinking individual meets the uh, the values and the worldview of chivalric romance. It leads to laughter. It leads to someone like Don Quixote, a completely incongruous and ridiculous figure. Don Quixote's world and the real world around as if see each other through an astigmatic prism. They do not quite understand each other. So we're both, I mean, so we have these possibilities of the basin becoming a helmet, an inn becoming a castle, windmill being seen as a giant, and Don Quixote is slashing off wine skins, thinking that he is killing giants. So for residual to be incorporated in the dominant features, there should be updation off the residual in a way as to suit the present time and traits, which is precisely not happening in Don Quixote. Chivalric romance does not enter Renaissance in an agreeable fashion, in a modified new avatar. It enters, the current time space in its old, archaic, anachronistic avatar that it is in the present condition. This anachronism evokes laughter, precisely. So, Cervantes purposefully does not reinvent knighthood, does not modify and make it into something else. He just keeps it in all its crudeness, in its purity, the concept of knighthood. Uh, so it stays as a misfit, to the current society's taste. So knighthood is brought by Cervantes in the Renaissance society in its crude, pristine form, which makes it idiosyncratic. The effect is absolutely odd and evokes hilarity. So Don Quixote and his squire Sancho Panza are anachronistic to the world around them. I would like to stop our lecture here today, and let's meet again for another round of discussions in our forthcoming lectures. Thank you.